My family laughed at my dad's job, so I started a business in his name, then hired them all just to make them call him boss. They never saw what I saw. Every holiday dinner, every weekend barbecue, my uncles would lean back in their chairs with fake laughs and smug grins, tossing around digs like confetti. Still turning wrenches, huh? Bet your hands never get clean. Man, your dad probably smells like an old garage. Even my older brother joined in, shaking his head like he was embarrassed to share the same last name. My cousins, younger but cruel in their own right, repeated the same jokes like a family chant. Uncle Jake the Grease Monkey, blue-collar daydreamer. They thought it was funny. I didn't. I saw something they didn't bother looking for. I saw a man come home after 12 hours under hoods, shoulders aching, back stiff, but still making time to check my homework. I saw him skip dinners because he was driving across town in a busted pickup, delivering a fixed car to someone who couldn't afford the tow. I saw him press cloth to his split knuckles, tape up a finger, and then go back out to finish a job before sunset. No complaints, no drama, just a quiet rhythm of sacrifice. They saw a mechanic. I saw a man keeping the gears of our family turning when everyone else was too proud or too blind to admit he was the backbone. So while they laughed, I learned. I didn't tell anyone when I started saving. Didn't brag when I studied business late at night while working part-time. They were too busy showing off promotions at companies they barely cared about, walking around in suits they couldn't afford, hoping someone would notice their name on a plastic office door. I kept my mouth shut, just like Dad. I kept my head down, my goals higher. I wanted to build something, not just for me, but for him. I registered the company in his name before he even knew I was working on it. Called it Hayes Automotive Solutions, not flashy, but solid. Just like him. Every value I built it on came from his garage. Honesty, hard work, show up on time, finish what you start. No shortcuts, no fast talk, just results. It started with 3 employees and a rented warehouse. I used every cent I had and a small loan Dad co-signed without asking questions. He thought it was for a used truck. I paid it off in 6 months. By the end of year 1, we had contracts with local fleets. By year 2, we'd added custom parts manufacturing. By year 3, we expanded to servicing entire logistics companies, hiring technicians, engineers, operations staff. I didn't put my name on a single sign. Every door, every invoice, every branded polo shirt had his name stitched across it. Hayes. Word spread in the family, but they didn't catch on at first. Some of them were out of work after company downsizing, others chasing startup jobs that dried up after the market dipped. One by one, I started getting emails. Resumes. Heard you're doing something in automotive. Looking for any experienced managers? I've got logistics experience from my last position. It took everything in me not to laugh. I hired them all. Not out of pity, out of strategy. Each role matched their skills, carefully placed just below executive level. Not one of them had final say. That belonged to Dad. I made sure of it. First staff meeting with the new hires, he walked in wearing that same gray work shirt he'd had since I was a kid. Not a designer button-up. Not a tailored jacket. Just the same tough fabric with his name embroidered in blue thread. He didn't say much. He never did. Just nodded once and told them we had contracts to fulfill. You should have seen their faces when I introduced him. This is the founder and chief of operations. You'll report to him directly. There was no way to misinterpret it. The man they once mocked, the one they wrote off as nothing more than a wrench turner, was now the man they had to answer to every Monday morning. He didn't lord it over them. That's not who he was. He never brought up the past, never mentioned the jokes or disrespect. He treated them the same way he treated everyone, firm but fair. Expected them to work just as hard as the rest. No special treatment, no shortcuts. Behind closed doors, I asked him once if he remembered what they used to say. He just shrugged and went back to reviewing payroll reports. Doesn't matter now, he said. We got work to do. That's how he was. Never about revenge. Never about ego. But I remembered. And that's why I built it the way I did, not just for success, not just for legacy. I built it so that every time they walked into work, they'd be reminded that the man they once laughed at was the one holding their future in his calloused hands. and they had to call him boss. Every single day. Dad had a way of moving through the office like he didn't care how clean the floors were or how high the ceilings stretched. Whether it was an admin cubicle or a $1 million warehouse, he walked with the same steady pace, like none of it impressed him, because it didn't. He'd seen more struggle in the corner of his first garage than any of them had seen in their cushioned careers. That was why I gave him the top-floor office and watched him refuse it the next day. Instead, he turned it into a break room. Said it was too quiet up there. He preferred the floor-level space next to the service bay. Said he needed to hear the machines and smell the steel if he was going to run the place right. I let him. There was no point arguing with a man who'd rebuilt his life on grit. My Uncle Roy, the loudest critic growing up, was now working under him in fleet operations. He once joked Dad couldn't manage a calendar if it didn't have oil changes marked on it. Now he had to get weekly approval from him to purchase tools and assign service teams. Watching Roy stand at Dad's desk waiting for a signature he once claimed would never hold value, that was the moment I realized how full circle this really was. But this wasn't revenge. I didn't build it to humiliate them. I built it so they would learn. And they did, slowly, with every month that passed. It showed in the way they spoke to him, no longer sarcastic, no more subtle jabs about his boots or hands. Now it was Mr. Hayes or Sir, even if it took effort to force the words out. I never told them to call him that. It just happened. Respect found its way into their voices because the business demanded it, and he earned it. My brother, Luke, joined last. Out of work after his tech startup collapsed, he called one afternoon sounding more tired than I'd ever heard. He didn't ask for a favor, just said he needed something steady. I gave him a role in logistics under Jenna, our operations lead. No title, no corner office. He started in scheduling, answering calls, logging incoming orders. It didn't sit well with him at first. This was a man who once said Dad's hands were a roadmap to nowhere. Now he had to sit in a cubicle and take instructions that traced directly back to the man he dismissed. I watched as he adjusted. Slowly. He never said he was sorry, but he didn't need to. The change showed in how he started coming to work early, how he asked questions, how he made coffee for the floor techs before meetings. A quiet kind of remorse that never needed words. As for the rest of the family, each had their own corner of the company now. Kevin, the cousin who used to say mechanics were just failed engineers, was now knee-deep in parts inventory, managing spreadsheets that couldn't survive without input from the men in coveralls he once laughed at. Cindy, who used to wrinkle her nose whenever Dad walked in the house smelling like the shop, now handled payroll and had to double-check the hours logged by every technician, including the ones who reminded her of him. None of them quit. That was the interesting part. Even with their pride stung, even with the weight of old words sitting on their shoulders, they stayed. Not one of them tried to leave, even when competitors offered more. Because deep down, I think they realized what this place really was proof that everything they used to mock was the foundation they'd always needed. We didn't just fix engines anymore. We consulted on fleet optimization, trained other garages, supplied proprietary diagnostic software, and offered 24/7 roadside support for high-value contracts. What started as a local service grew into a multi-state enterprise. But at the center of it all remained a small office with peeling paint and a clock that ticked louder than necessary, the space Dad refused to upgrade because it worked just fine. He still got his hands dirty. He never gave up the habit. If a tech was out sick or behind on a job, Dad would be under the lift before anyone else. He didn't believe in titles without responsibility. That's why when people walked into headquarters and saw the founder elbow deep in engine grease, no one dared to question it. They understood now. The dirt on his hands wasn't a mark of shame. It was proof of ownership. I had plans to expand, and I brought those discussions to Dad late one evening, maps and diagrams spread across his workbench like a battlefield plan. He didn't nod or smile like I expected. Instead, he wiped his hands with an old rag and said, "You sure you're not doing this to prove a point?" It stopped me. For a moment, I wondered if I was. I told him the truth. Maybe I was in the beginning, but now, it's about building something that lasts. He stared at me for a few seconds, and then turned back to a rusted alternator. That was his approval. He never gave speeches. He gave direction through motion. We hired new staff, ones who had never known the old jokes, who didn't recognize the surnames of my relatives or care where they came from. To them, Dad was just the boss. The one who walked the floor every morning and pointed out tiny errors no software ever could. The one who didn't need to yell to correct a mistake. He just raised an eyebrow and let the silence work its way into your spine. I eventually built a leadership board, a mix of experts from outside the family and a few relatives who had proved themselves. Not because of their blood, but because they earned it. The rule remained. Everyone answered to him. I chaired the board, but he held the final say on anything that touched operations. One day, a new hire fresh out of business school asked him during orientation what his background was. Dad looked up from his clipboard and said, "I fix things." Nothing else. The guy didn't ask again. That became a motto around the shop. We fix things. Simple, direct. Just like him. It wasn't a marketing slogan. We never printed it on brochures. But the employees said it often. When a job went wrong, when a part arrived late, when a system crashed during a demo, someone would shrug and say, "We fix things." Then they would. The family started showing up early, staying late, offering ideas. They stopped seeing themselves as victims of a failed market or bad luck and started seeing themselves as part of something earned. Even Luke, who once mocked every callus on Dad's hands, began shadowing the service teams on weekends just to understand the workflow better. But I never let them forget where it all started. Every year on the company anniversary, I held a mandatory meeting. No decorations. No cake. Just a 10-minute address in the warehouse where it all began. I'd speak briefly, thank the staff, and then invite Dad to close it out. He never said much. Usually just something like, "Get back to work. We've still got jobs to finish." And that was it. But the applause that followed said everything. No one laughed at him now. Not one joke. Not one rolled eye. Just respect, earned through years of silence and strength. I remembered the old days clearly, when his name was the punchline, when his work boots left stains no one wanted on their floors. I remembered the disgusted looks, the dismissive words, the backhanded compliments. I carried all of it with me, not as weight, but as fuel. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It became something deeper, a way to reshape our family, a way to carve respect into the bones of a generation that once believed only white-collar success mattered. The business grew, but Dad stayed the same. Still drove the same truck. Still brought his own lunch. Still used the same battered thermos he'd had since I was 10. People offered him newer ones. He declined every time. Said the coffee didn't taste right in anything else. There were offers to sell. Big ones. Firms wanted to buy out the brand, slap it on their own operations, gut the leadership, and move production to a cheaper state. I turned them down without hesitation. Not just because of what we built, but because I knew what they didn't. You can't manufacture character. You can't franchise the kind of trust Dad created with a nod, a job done right, and a bill that never had surprise charges. And I wasn't done. The next phase was already underway. A training center named after him, Hayes Technical Institute. Not a school for future executives. A place for people like him. Tradesmen. Technicians. Workers who wanted more than a paycheck. They wanted pride. I didn't tell him about it until the sign went up. He stared at it for a long time, said nothing, then turned and asked if we could get new lifts for the shop floor first. That was his way of saying thank you. But I wasn't building it for recognition. I was building it because the world had too many people like my uncles, cousins, and brother had once been quick to laugh at the ones doing the real work. If I could shift even a small part of that mindset, then all the long nights, the quiet years, the quiet victories would be worth it. Dad never asked for any of this. That's what made him the right one to build it around. He never needed attention, never chased applause. He just fixed what was broken. The company had matured. Contracts ran themselves, logistics moved like a clock, and departments operated with precision. The family no longer hesitated when they entered the building. They didn't drag their feet or mumble under their breath. They wore the company badge with quiet discipline, just like every other worker. No one talked about the old days anymore. Not because they forgot, but because they finally understood. Dad's name was now attached to 7 branches, each serving a different region. Expansion was never forced. It happened because people trusted our service. Trusted him. Clients knew when they saw the Hayes logo, they were dealing with a company that didn't inflate bills, didn't skip steps, and didn't make excuses. But time doesn't wait for any of us. One morning, Dad showed up 30 minutes later than usual. That never happened. He didn't mention it. He just walked in, pulled on his work jacket, and reviewed the service reports like always. But I noticed the slowness in his step, the pause when he sat down, the slight stiffness in how he reached for his mug. He waved it off with a simple answer. Old parts don't move like they used to. I didn't push it. He hated attention, especially if it hinted at weakness. But over the following months, I saw more signs. He took longer breaks, stopped joining field calls, didn't crouch under vehicles anymore. Not because he didn't want to, but because his body no longer let him. So I adjusted the structure, shifted daily responsibilities to the operations team, took pressure off his shoulders without telling him directly. He noticed. Of course, he did. After a week, he came into my office, sat down without asking, and looked at me for a solid minute. You moving me out of the way? No, I answered. I'm making sure you don't burn out. He stared a little longer. Then he leaned back and let out a slow breath. About time. That was it. No protest. No lecture. Just quiet relief. Like he'd finally decided it was okay to stop carrying everything alone. We transitioned him into a founder's chair. Symbolic, but powerful. He stayed on site, handled legacy clients, advised on technical strategies, but no longer had to oversee day-to-day operations. The staff treated him the same, like a leader, not a relic. Because he earned that place, not through titles or paperwork, but by building a foundation no one could shake. My brother took on more responsibility. By then, he'd become someone I didn't recognize in a good way. Reliable, organized, respected. He no longer treated the business like a fallback. He treated it like a purpose. He started mentoring new hires, took late-night calls, even volunteered to cover shifts when departments got tight. He never asked for praise. I saw Dad notice. I saw the way his eyes followed Luke during staff briefings, a subtle nod here, a faint smirk there. No words exchanged, but something had shifted. Our uncle stayed on. Roy ran the fleet division full-time. Kevin managed procurement. Cindy supervised accounting. Each one had found their rhythm. The old arrogance was gone. They didn't talk about past careers or what they used to be. They focused on what they were now, part of something bigger than their egos. But the day came when Dad sat across from me again. Same seat, same posture. He set his keys on the desk. Simple gesture, but final. I'm done, he said. Not tired. Just done. I nodded. I'd known it was coming. He was approaching 70. His eyes didn't track like they used to, and the days in the shop took more from him than they gave. He didn't want a farewell party. No gifts. No speeches. Just a clean handoff. So we arranged it exactly how he asked. He walked the floor one last time, shaking hands, offering nods, exchanging quiet words with people who had worked beside him for years. Some of the newer employees didn't know his full story, but they felt the weight of his presence. You didn't need a biography to recognize integrity. Before he left, he stopped at the corner of the original warehouse, the same one we started in. It had been converted into an archive space, but we'd preserved a single lift bay as it was his old station untouched. The concrete still bore his oil stains. The pegboard still held his tools. He looked around for a few moments, then smiled. Still smells like work. That was his goodbye. He moved to a small house just outside town. Quiet area, few neighbors. Nothing flashy. He started gardening, built birdhouses, fixed things for neighbors who didn't ask. He didn't miss the office. He'd done his part. Now it was ours. I kept the company growing, but never beyond recognition. Every new project had to pass one test. Would Dad be proud of it? If not, it didn't move forward. I led with that filter. A few years later, we hit a major milestone. National contract. Massive distribution client. Required building a new facility. I named it after him, the Hayes Technical Center. I didn't tell him, just invited him to the ribbon cutting. He showed up in jeans, clean boots, and that same jacket from his shop days. No speech again. Just one sentence after I asked him to say a few words. Keep it honest. Then he stepped back and let the applause roll past him. Time passed. Employees changed. Some retired. Some moved on. The family grew into their roles permanently. No one questioned why we still used the original mission statement written in Dad's own handwriting. Do it right. Every time. I eventually stepped back too. Not out of fatigue, but because it was time. A younger leadership board was ready. Trained. Loyal. Aligned with our values. I kept an advisory role. Not because I wanted power, but because I wanted the legacy protected. The day Dad passed, it was quiet. Peaceful. No hospitals. No machines. Just a chair on his back porch, a mug in his hand, a wrench beside him. Maybe he was fixing something in his mind even then. We didn't hold a public memorial. That wasn't him. Instead, we closed every facility for one day. Not a moment of silence, an entire shift. Every worker stayed home. Every light stayed off. Every screen went dark. That was how we honored him. Not with speeches, but with stillness. His funeral was private. Family only. No suits. Just flannel shirts, work jackets, and boots that had seen real ground. The same way he lived. I took one thing from his house. A rusted metal sign he'd kept from his first garage. Bent, faded, but still legible. It read, "Honest work. Fair price." I hung it above the entrance of our main facility. No plaque. No spotlight. Just there, watching over everyone who walked in. The business kept going. Because it wasn't built on trend or gimmick. It was built on sweat, patience, and a refusal to compromise. It became more than a family name. It became proof that dignity in work matters more than status. That real respect isn't demanded, it's built. Slowly. One job at a time. The men and women who laughed at him became the same people who defended his name whenever it came up. Not because they felt guilty, but because they'd learned. They'd watched a man turn wrench turning into leadership, turn silence into command, turn calloused hands into a legacy. I didn't create the business to punish anyone. I built it so that the world could finally see what I saw from the beginning.